The palace was as still as a graveyard while the lawyers spilled all the details. What Edward's legal team just confirmed has turned the royal family's carefully constructed order completely upside down. The confirmation nobody expected. There are moments in royal history that arrive quietly. No fanfare, no announcement on the palace steps, no carefully worded press release timed for maximum control. Just a legal document, a few lines of formal language, and suddenly everything shifts. That is exactly what happened in the final days of April 2025. Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, had been operating in the background of royal life for years. Steady, reliable, occasionally underestimated. The kind of royal who shows up, does the work, and rarely generates the kind of headlines that make editors reach for their largest font. But what his lawyers confirmed in late April changed all of that in ways the palace was clearly not prepared to manage publicly. The confirmation came through legal channels first, not through a royal press office, not through a coordinated media strategy, through lawyers. And that detail matters more than it might seem. When royals want to control a story, they use the press office. When royals want something to simply become fact before anyone can object, they use lawyers. Edward's team chose lawyers. That tells you something about the nature of what was being confirmed. It tells you something about the confidence behind the move. And it tells you something about the calculated precision with which this moment was engineered. So what exactly did those lawyers confirm? Edward, the youngest son of the late Queen Elizabeth II, had formally secured not one but two title changes. The first was already known, at least in outline. He had been expected to inherit the Dukedom of Edinburgh following his father, Prince Philip's death in April 2021. That was always part of the plan. It was the second change that stopped people cold. Sources close to the matter confirmed that Edward's legal standing had been quietly upgraded in ways that place him in a position of institutional weight that his brothers, including Andrew, simply do not hold. Two titles, one man, and a family that, according to insiders, was given very little time to prepare for what that combination would mean in practice. Now here is where it gets complicated. The title of Duke of Edinburgh carries history. It carries prestige. It carries the memory of Prince Philip, a man who spent over 70 years in service to the crown and to a queen who depended on him in ways the public only partially understood. For Edward to carry that title was always going to be significant. But a second title, confirmed through legal channels, layered on top of the first, that is not inheritance. That is elevation. And elevation in royal circles is never accidental. People who follow the mechanics of royal protocol closely will tell you that these things do not simply happen. Titles are not confirmed through lawyers on a quiet Tuesday in April without months, sometimes years, of deliberate groundwork. Someone planned this, someone approved this, and the fact that the palace did not lead with it, did not package it neatly for public consumption, did not send it out through the usual royal communications machinery, suggests that not everyone inside that institution was part of the planning. That is the open question sitting at the center of this story. Who knew, who approved it, and who, when those legal confirmations landed, felt the ground shift beneath them in a way they had not anticipated? To understand why this moment carries the weight it does, you have to go back, not just to Philip's death, not just to the reign of King Charles III. You have to go back much further. You have to understand the strange and winding road Edward himself has traveled. Because Edward's story is not the story of a man who always knew what he wanted. It is the story of a man who took a very long time to find his footing, and who, once he found it, proved far more strategic than anyone had given him credit for. But before we get to Edward's journey, consider this. The lawyers filed, the confirmation was made, and somewhere inside Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace and the quiet country residences where senior royals conduct their most sensitive conversations, phones were ringing, messages were being sent, and at least one senior royal, according to a source who spoke on condition of strict anonymity, reacted to the news with words that could not be repeated in polite company. That source declined to name the royal in question. They did not need to. Because when you understand who stands to lose the most from Edward's double title confirmation, the identity of that unnamed voice becomes almost obvious, and the implications of their reaction, of the anger behind it, of the silence that followed it, tell a story that goes far beyond a legal document filed in late April. This is not just about titles, this is about power, about legacy, about which branch of the royal family gets to stand closest to the crown in the years to come, and about whether the late Queen's youngest son has just made the most consequential move in the modern history of the Windsor family. The lawyers confirmed the titles. What they could not confirm, what no one has been willing to say on the record, is what happens next. And that is exactly where this story is only just beginning. Edward's long road to this moment. To understand what Edward has just done, you have to understand where Edward came from. And where he came from, in royal terms, was not an easy place. He was the fourth child, the youngest. Born in March 1964, arriving into a family that had already established its rhythms, its roles, and its expectations long before he was old enough to have opinions about any of them. Charles was already the heir. Anne was already the determined, no-nonsense daughter who needed no one's approval. Andrew was the golden boy, the favorite son in ways that people inside royal circles spoke about openly for decades. Edward arrived last, and in families, royal or otherwise, arriving last means you spend a significant portion of your life figuring out exactly what your place is supposed to be. For a long time, Edward struggled with that question in very public ways. There was the Royal Marines episode. 1987, Edward had enrolled in the Commando Training Center with what seemed like genuine intention. His father, Prince Philip, had served in the Royal Navy with distinction. His brother Andrew had served in the Falklands War, flying helicopters under enemy fire, earning a kind of military credibility that translated directly into public respect. The expectation, unstated but absolutely present, was that Edward would complete his training and take his place in the military tradition that the Windsor men had long used to define their public purpose. He left after 4 months. He did not complete the training. He walked away. And the reaction, particularly from his father, was not gentle. Philip had very specific ideas about what royal men should be. He had shaped himself through discipline, through service, through the kind of hardship that builds character in ways comfort never can. Edward's departure from the Marines was, in Philip's eyes, more than a career change. It was a statement. And it was a statement Philip found difficult to accept. The public was not much kinder. The press in the late 1980s was not interested in nuance when it came to royal stories. Edward's exit from military training was covered with a bluntness that left marks. Words like weak were used. Words like failure appeared in columns written by people who had never met him and had no interest in understanding his reasons. He was compared unfavorably to Andrew. He was compared unfavorably to his father. He was, in the language of that particular moment in tabloid history, a disappointment. What happened next is where the story gets interesting. Edward did not retreat. He pivoted. He moved into television production. He founded a company called Ardent Productions. And here is where the narrative that his critics had already written about him began to quietly, slowly come apart at the seams. Because the television work was not successful in the way he had hoped, Ardent Productions generated controversy, particularly around coverage of his own family, and eventually wound down. Another setback, another round of unfavorable coverage, another chapter in what the press had decided was the story of a royal who simply could not find his footing. But something else was happening underneath all of that. Edward was watching. He was learning. Not in the dramatic, visible way that generates headlines, but in the quiet, incremental way that produces results years later when no one is expecting them. He was watching how institutions work, how power consolidates, how titles and roles and positioning within a family structure translate into real influence. He was, sources who knew him during this period suggest, far more attentive to the mechanics of royal life than his public image gave him credit for. Then came Sophie Rhys-Jones, who became Sophie Countess of Wessex in June 1999, and who has since become, in the assessment of most serious royal observers, one of the most quietly effective members of the modern royal family. Sophie understood public service in a way that complemented Edward's evolution perfectly. She understood how to build trust with institutions, with charities, with communities. And she understood, perhaps better than anyone around her, that in the royal family, consistency is its own form of power. Together, Edward and Sophie built something that the louder, more dramatic members of the family were too busy generating headlines to notice being built. They built a reputation, not a glamorous one, not the kind that fills magazine covers or generates millions of clicks, but the kind that matters inside the institution, the kind that earns trust from the monarch directly, the kind that, over time, becomes the foundation on which significant decisions are made. When Philip died in April 2021, the question of the Edinburgh title arose almost immediately. Philip had held it since 1947. It was one of the most historically significant titles in the royal portfolio. The expectation, shaped in part by conversations that had taken place during Philip's lifetime, was that Edward would eventually receive it. Philip had reportedly expressed that wish. The Queen had reportedly supported it. And when Charles became king in September 2022, one of his early acts was to confirm that Edward would indeed become Duke of Edinburgh. That was the first title. It was meaningful. It was historic. It was the kind of inheritance that closes one chapter and opens another. But it was not, as it turns out, the end of the story. It was not even close to the end of the story. Because between the confirmation of the Edinburgh title and the legal documents filed in April 2025, something else was being arranged. Something that went beyond inheritance and moved into the territory of deliberate, structural elevation. Something that required lawyers rather than press releases. Something that had been discussed, debated, and ultimately approved at a level of the institution that does not make decisions lightly. And here is the question that everyone close to this story is now asking. Was this always the plan? Was the Edinburgh title always intended to be the first step in a longer sequence? Was the man who walked away from the Royal Marines in 1987, who endured years of tabloid derision, who spent decades being described as the least significant of the Queen's children, was he always moving toward this moment? The people who know Edward best will not answer that question directly, but the ones who have watched him most carefully say this. Edward has always been more patient than people realized. And in royal life, patience is not a passive quality. Patience, deployed correctly over a long enough period of time, is the most powerful strategy available. The double title confirmation did not come from nowhere. It came from decades of groundwork laid by a man who understood, perhaps earlier than anyone suspected, that the race does not always go to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it goes to the one who is still standing when everyone else has exhausted themselves. Edward is still standing. And now he is holding two titles that together represent something the Windsor family has not seen in a very long time. A quiet man in a position of very loud consequence. Who loses when Edward wins? In royal life, elevation is never a solo event. When one person rises, others feel it. Sometimes they feel it in ways they can articulate clearly. Sometimes they feel it in ways they cannot explain, but cannot ignore. And sometimes, if the elevation is significant enough, they feel it in ways that alter relationships permanently. Edward's double title confirmation is that kind of elevation. To understand who loses when Edward wins, you have to understand the landscape of the royal family as it exists right now. Not the version presented in carefully managed photocalls. Not the version described in approved biographies. The actual landscape. The one shaped by old wounds, unresolved tensions, and the very human reality that even royal families operate according to rules of proximity, favor, and influence that would be recognizable in any family anywhere in the world. Start with Andrew. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, is Edward's older brother. He is the second son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, and he is, by any honest assessment of his current position, a man in a deeply diminished state. The events of the past several years, the association with Jeffrey Epstein, the catastrophic BBC interview in November 2019, the decision to step back from royal duties, the settlement of a civil case in January 2022, have left Andrew in a position that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. He no longer carries out official royal engagements. He no longer stands on the Buckingham Palace balcony during major national events. He has been stripped of his military titles and royal patronages. He remains a duke, he retains the title of prince. But in practical terms, in terms of function and influence and proximity to the working heart of the institution, Andrew is on the outside, looking in. And Edward is now firmly on the inside, looking out. That contrast would have been almost inconceivable in the 1980s and 1990s, when Andrew was the favored son, the decorated veteran, the royal who carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew where he stood. Edward was the afterthought. Andrew was the story. Now those positions have reversed in ways that are structural, not merely symbolic. The double title gives Edward a weight that Andrew, regardless of whatever private conversations happen within the family, simply cannot match through his current standing. Andrew holds a dukedom. Edward holds two titles with historical and institutional significance layered on top of each other. In the language of royal hierarchy, that gap is not a small one. It is not a gap that Andrew can close through attendance at private family gatherings or through whatever residual goodwill he maintains with his brother the king. Sources suggest that Andrew's reaction to the confirmation was not one of quiet acceptance. Those same sources decline to be specific, but the picture they paint is of a man who feels the distance between himself and the center of royal life growing wider with each passing month. And Edward's elevation in his reading of events is not a neutral development. It is a statement about who the institution trusts, a statement about who the institution is prepared to invest with authority, and a statement that, by implication, says something very clear about who it is not. But Andrew is not the only one who feels the weight of this shift. Consider the York daughters. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, Andrew's children, have spent years navigating a complicated position within the royal family. They are princesses by birth. They carry royal titles, but they are not working royals. They fund their own lives. They pursue private careers. They attend royal events when invited, but operate largely outside the formal structure of the institution. That position has always been slightly uncomfortable, slightly undefined, slightly dependent on the goodwill of whoever sits at the center of royal decision-making. Edward's elevation does not directly threaten them, but it does something almost as significant. It clarifies the hierarchy in ways that leave their position looking more peripheral than before. When the landscape shifts and your uncle consolidates institutional weight that your father no longer holds, the message embedded in that shift is not easy to ignore. The York family's standing, already complicated, becomes more complicated still when measured against the Edinburgh branch's rising trajectory. Then there is the question of the Wales household. This one is more delicate, more carefully spoken around, but it is present in every serious conversation about what Edward's double title means for the broader royal structure. Prince William, Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, has his own very clear sense of how the royal family should be organized. He has, according to multiple sources, strong views about the size of the working royal family, about who should carry out official duties, and about the relationship between titles and genuine institutional function. William and Edward have always maintained a respectful relationship. There is no dramatic falling out to report, no single incident that defines their dynamic. But respectful is not the same as close, and the question being asked in certain circles is whether William views Edward's expanded institutional footprint as complementary to his own vision for the monarchy, or as something that complicates it. Because here is the reality that William understands better than most. A royal family that is too large, too titled, too populated with people carrying significant designations becomes difficult to manage. It becomes difficult to present as lean and purposeful in the way that modern monarchies need to be presented to maintain public support. William has spoken, through intermediaries and through the positioning of his own household, about a slimmed-down monarchy being the model for the future. Edward, holding two significant titles, sits in a certain amount of tension with that vision. Not an irreconcilable tension, but a tension. And in royal life, unresolved tensions have a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments. There is also the matter of what Edward's elevation signals about the king's thinking. Charles has made deliberate choices since ascending the throne. He has shaped the working royal family with clear intention, reducing numbers, clarifying roles, making decisions that reflect his particular philosophy about what the monarchy should look like in the 21st century. Elevating Edward, approving the double title, choosing to allow the legal confirmation to proceed in the manner it did, all of that reflects a set of priorities on Charles's part. And those priorities include, it seems, a very specific trust in Edward, a trust that Charles is expressing not through words, but through the most durable language available to a monarch, through titles, through structure, through the permanent legally confirmed redistribution of institutional weight. Someone gains when that happens, and someone inevitably loses. The people closest to this story know exactly who sits in each of those categories. And the losses, when you map them out carefully, when you follow the lines of title and function in proximity to the crown, tell a story about the Windsor family that is still being written, one legal confirmation at a time. The palace's silence and what it's hiding. In royal communications, silence is never empty. It is never the absence of a decision. It is never the result of oversight or inattention or a press office that simply forgot to respond. Royal silence is a tool. It is deployed deliberately, maintained carefully, and withdrawn only when the institution has decided that speaking serves its interests better than staying quiet. The palace has been very silent about Edward's double title confirmation, and that silence is one of the most revealing things about this entire story. When the legal confirmation landed in late April of 2025, the expectation among royal correspondents and institutional observers was that Buckingham Palace would follow with some form of official statement, a brief acknowledgement, a carefully worded paragraph that placed the confirmation in context, managed the narrative, and directed public attention toward the version of events the institution preferred. That is the standard playbook. That is how these things are handled when the palace is in control of the story. No such statement came. Not in the first 24 hours, not in the days that followed, not in the form of a briefing to trusted royal journalists, not even in the form of a spokesperson confirming the bare facts on background. The palace offered nothing, and into that nothing, questions rushed in like water through a gap in a wall. Sources who operate at the intersection of royal communications and institutional politics describe the silence in strikingly similar terms. One source, speaking carefully and without attribution, used the phrase managed distance. The palace, in this source's reading, is not unaware of what Edward's lawyers confirmed. The palace is very aware, but the institution is choosing to stand at a remove from the story, allowing the legal confirmation to exist as a fact, without placing the royal communications apparatus behind it in any visible way. That is a significant distinction. There is a difference between a royal development that the palace endorses publicly and one that the palace permits without endorsing. The first carries the full institutional weight of the monarchy behind it. The second exists in a more ambiguous space, a space where the fact is real, the legal standing is genuine, but the official embrace is withheld in ways that leave the development slightly exposed, slightly unprotected from the interpretations and questions that inevitably follow. Edward's double title confirmation appears to be living in that second space. And the question is why? To answer that, you have to understand something about how Charles operates as king. Charles III is not a monarch who makes impulsive decisions. He is not a man who acts without considering the downstream consequences of his choices across multiple relationships and multiple time frames. He thinks carefully. He weighs competing considerations. He is, by the accounts of people who have worked closely with him over decades, intensely aware of the emotional and relational dimensions of every significant institutional decision. He approved Edward's elevation. That much is not in question. But approving something and championing it publicly are two different positions. And the gap between those positions in this particular case appears to contain a significant amount of family complexity that the palace is not yet prepared to address in front of an audience. Consider what a full-throated public endorsement of Edward's double title would require. It would require the palace to explain, in terms accessible to the public, why Edward now holds this expanded institutional position. That explanation would inevitably invite comparisons with Andrew, whose diminished standing would be thrown into even sharper relief by a detailed account of Edward's elevation. Comparisons with the York family, whose peripheral position in the working royal structure would become more visible in the context of an Edinburgh branch ascending, and comparisons, however uncomfortable, with the Wales household and whatever private negotiations or understandings may or may not have taken place before the legal confirmation was filed, the palace does not want to have those conversations publicly. Not yet, possibly not ever, in the direct form they would require. So the silence holds. And inside the silence, according to sources with genuine proximity to the situation, there are conversations happening that the public is not hearing. There are phone calls being made at levels of the institution that do not generate paper trails. There are intermediaries carrying messages between households that would rather not be seen communicating directly on this particular subject. One source described the atmosphere inside royal circles following the confirmation as careful. Not panicked, not hostile, but careful in the way that people are careful when they know that one wrong word, one poorly judged comment to the wrong journalist, one leak from the wrong aide could turn a manageable situation into an unmanageable one. The careful atmosphere extends to Edward himself. Edward has not spoken publicly about the confirmation in any meaningful way. He has not given interviews. He has not positioned himself in front of cameras to discuss what the double title means to him personally or institutionally. He has, characteristically, allowed the legal fact to speak for itself while maintaining the composure and restraint that has defined his public presentation for the past decade. But his composure should not be mistaken for passivity. People who know Edward well, people who have watched him operate across the years when his public profile was low, and his institutional influence was quietly growing, describe a man who is fully aware of the significance of what has just been confirmed. A man who understands exactly what he holds, and a man who is, in the words of one source, who has known him for over 20 years, in absolutely no hurry. That last point is worth sitting with for a moment, because the history of the royal family is full of individuals who moved too fast, who pressed their advantage too visibly, who made the mistake of allowing ambition to show its face before the moment was right. Those individuals, almost without exception, found that the institution pushed back, found that the very weight they were trying to leverage turned against them when they reached for it too obviously. Edward has watched that pattern play out across his own family. He watched it with Andrew, who flew too close to associations that eventually consumed his standing entirely. He watched it, from a respectful distance, with Harry and Meghan, whose very public assertion of their own terms generated a rupture that has not healed and shows no signs of healing. He watched it with Charles himself during the long, painful decades before the crown arrived, and he learned. The palace silence around his double title confirmation is not, in this reading, a sign of institutional ambivalence about Edward. It is a sign of institutional management at a moment when too many competing sensitivities are in play simultaneously. The silence is protective. It is buying time. It is allowing the legal fact to settle into the landscape of royal life before anyone is required to publicly explain what it means and why it happened. But silence has a lifespan. It cannot be maintained indefinitely when the fact it is protecting is as significant as this one. Eventually, the palace will need to say something. Eventually, the questions being asked by royal correspondents, by constitutional scholars, by the public that funds and sustains the institution, will require answers that silence alone cannot provide. And when that moment arrives, when the palace finally speaks, what it says and what it chooses not to say will reveal things about the state of the Windsor family that the careful, managed quiet of the past several weeks has been working very hard to keep hidden. The lawyers have spoken, the palace has not. And in that gap between legal confirmation and institutional endorsement, the most important chapter of this story is still being written behind closed doors. What this changes forever. Some moments in royal history look small when they happen. They arrive without ceremony, without crowds, without the kind of visible drama that signals to everyone watching that something permanent has just shifted. Then, years later, historians look back and identify exactly those quiet moments as the ones that changed everything. Edward's double title confirmation is one of those moments. What has just been legally established is not simply a personal milestone for the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II. It is a structural realignment, a reordering of the Windsor family's internal architecture that will outlast the current tensions, outlast the current silences, and outlast the carefully managed atmospheres that surround it right now. Titles in the royal family are not decorative. They are not honorary. They carry legal weight, institutional function, and generational consequence. What Edward holds today, his children will inherit tomorrow. The Edinburgh line, already significant by virtue of Philip's legacy alone, now carries a compounded institutional gravity that places it in a category separate from every other non-heir branch of the Windsor family. That is a permanent change. It cannot be undone quietly. It cannot be reversed through a press release or a private conversation or a gentle repositioning of royal communications. What the lawyers confirmed in April 2025 has entered the permanent record of the British monarchy in ways that will shape succession conversations, working royal structures, and family dynamics for decades to come. Consider what this means for the generation that follows. Edward and Sophie's children, James Viscount Severn and Lady Louise Windsor, now stand in a position within the royal family that their equivalents in the York line simply do not occupy. The institutional weight their father has accumulated, through patience, through consistency, through the deliberate and decades-long construction of a reputation that the palace trusts, flows forward. It compounds. It shapes what is possible for them in ways that titles alone do not capture, but titles absolutely enable. The monarchy is changing shape. Charles has always said, in various forms and through various channels, that the modern monarchy must justify itself through service and relevance. He has spoken about a leaner institution, a more purposeful one. What his approval of Edward's double title suggests is that lean does not mean peripheral for Edward. It means trusted. It means central. It means that in the slimmed down monarchy Charles is building, Edward is not being reduced. He is being embedded. And that embedding, legally confirmed, institutionally protected, and generationally consequential, is what makes this moment different from every previous chapter in Edward's long and underestimated story. The quiet son arrived last. He leaves nothing to chance now. Edward's story was never supposed to end here. The fourth child, the one they underestimated, the one who left the Marines and lost the headlines and built something anyway, slowly, quietly, and on his own terms. 2 titles confirmed. 1 family permanently changed. And a man who always had more patience than anyone gave him credit for.